All right, thank you all for joining. I know there's a few folks still hopping over. I know we had some quick transitions today. We were hoping to be able to wrap up early enough that we wouldn't eat up too much of your Friday afternoon. Although I have been reminded that Friday afternoons mean something different when you're kind of social isolation or social distancing, but still wanted to do this kind of timely. So thank you all for sticking with us through a lot of presentations this morning. And thank you all for kind of coming to the summit this year in general. You know, we were really excited to be able to put this on. We look forward to kind of doing more events like this in the future. And if you have any feedback, we'll be asking for that next week. And we'd love any kind of feedback you have on this kind of format and other things we can do to help when we're kind of doing these virtual trainings. So this session really will be kind of wrapping up. We're going to talk about some high-level next steps, some action steps to consider across kind of 4 big areas of staff, fundraising, communications, and some of our strategy and finances. And then we'll have a little bit of time to talk about some of the resources we're offering afterwards. And I'd encourage you all throughout, because this is going to be kind of some high level, some action steps. Any questions you all have that maybe you didn't get to ask, maybe a facilitator didn't see during the summit, feel free to ask those now around any of those topics. And we're happy to talk about those as time allows during the session today. So in general, some kind of advice or some things we're seeing some of our partners that are being really successful right now do. You know, making sure others know that we're still working every day. You know, we've gotten this question from donors a little bit about like, oh, like, are your nonprofits like still open right now? And we're always, you know, quick to say our nonprofits are working as much as they were before, right? And that's probably true for a lot of y'all as well. You know, it's not overselling it to say that for a lot of us, our mission stayed the same, but we basically created a new nonprofit and new programming overnight, basically, right? To meet the needs of our clients and to step up for our community. And that's a story we need to be getting out there, really talking about making sure we're capturing, making sure we're kind of proudly sharing. Secondly, when it relates to either kind of some of our program shifting, some of our fundraising efforts right now, just kind of any organizational effort, we need to really take this kind of marathon approach. So there's still a level of urgency for a lot of us, especially those working the front lines, and those of us working in kind of supporting things, especially thinking about kind of education in the fall. It feels like there's kind of a countless amount of work to do, a countless amount of need. But we also need to make sure our staff are energized enough and not too burnt out to be able to meet that need for the foreseeable future. We know that this will probably be somewhat of our reality for another 4 to 6 months, if not longer. So thinking about how we keep our team engaged and how we make sure that this is a well-performed marathon, but not a dead sprint. And then finally, the more planning we can do, the better. You know, we know typically both in fundraising, but also just strategy in general, planning and research are the 2 things that go out the window, especially in fundraising for small nonprofits, because we just have so much going on. And that's always a little bit of a struggle because we're less efficient. We kind of fall in the same kind of patterns because we find that to be true. But even more so right now, especially, we need to be thinking about how we plan for different contingencies, how we think about different fundraising opportunities, how we think about different programming paths moving forward. We need to be planning out more than we ever have. Some of that's a little easier to do when we're working kind of remotely because we can kind of just put our head down and kind of think for a while and put something together ideally. But it's really important we're making that space, even amidst all the fires we have to put out to do some of that planning and long-term thinking. The first kind of major trend, you know, we've talked about this during a couple of breakout sessions. I'll also note now, and I'll talk about the resources at the end, but I know some people expressed wanting to go to multiple breakouts at the same time. Luckily, unlike a real conference where you would have just missed that, we did record every session. We have slides for every session. We'll be putting those up across the next week on the website and then letting you know about those when they're available. So if there are sessions, for instance, some of the sessions on staff engagement that maybe you weren't able to go to if you prioritized some of the fundraising conversations, those will be available to view and to engage with afterwards. So when thinking about staff and our teams, kind of some next steps and kind of tangible things we can do coming out of the summit as we think about moving our organization forward. First is planning some type of engagement event for our teams. It's been 4.5 months that our staff have probably been working remotely to some degree, or working in person but differently than before. With increased demand, with the shift virtual, with everything going on around Black Lives Matter and the protests. So our staff are burnt out and tired, right, and are doing a lot of work and doing amazing work. So we need to think about a way in the next few months to really kind of engage them and show them that appreciation, right? Think about a way to kind of make sure that they're staying kind of engaged with the organization. And additionally to that, in the next few months, we're probably going to be making a lot of decisions around reopening, maybe long-term office strategy, what our programming is going to look like. And regardless of where in the process, we need to make sure staff are involved before we're just kind of telling them what we're doing. So the earlier the better, but making sure those engagement conversations are happening. Someone just asked what some of those engagement events could look like. We've seen some people that if their staff are comfortable with it and would like to do a social distance gathering kind of in a park, like they would with their friends. We've seen other folks that still want to stay virtual for kind of safety and health reasons, do virtual happy hours with their team, a virtual trivia challenge or a virtual game. There's a few different kind of virtual kind of game platforms that you can use for, virtual Pictionary or things like that. If that type of thing doesn't feel really kind of culturally appropriate for your staff, if you have a bit more of a formal culture, maybe just a virtual happy hour, or just some type of virtual, bring everyone else quarantine with you onto the screen, right? We have a lot of dogs and cats, babies and kids that is up in the background of our Zooms these days. So recognizing that kind of whole person as a staff person and maybe doing a little bit of a family meeting or something. But finding some way to engage staff in some type of kind of non-just work event. A second thing we've seen that's really important for kind of keeping staff and kind of the team engaged right now is the conversations we have, right? It can be isolating to work remotely, especially right now during kind of social distancing. So important that we're finding ways to connect with the team and connect the team with each other. So we want to focus on some collaborative projects that are going to kind of force our staff to kind of continue to work together as they often do. We're going to focus on some weekly team meetings to make sure at least once a week, a large group, if not all of our staff, are getting together for that kind of broad update to make sure everyone feels like they're plugged into what's happening. And we want to continue kind of weekly one-on-ones, so making sure that everyone at the organization has a one-on-one meeting with someone else so that they feel that kind of personal connection. The big thing here is that collaborative work or finding some way to really get folks kind of peer-to-peer conversation. It's definitely important, and it's been admirable. A lot of the other private executive directors on the line have been thinking about how to keep their staff engaged, how they're talking to their staff. But one of the things we're hearing that team members really are missing is being able to talk to each other, right? Those kind of quasi-water cooler conversations. How we can't really replicate that perfectly, but how can we find some ways to kind of drive some of that peer-to-peer conversation still in a remote environment? And then finally, the last one in terms of kind of accountable, having kind of a goal setting or resetting conversation with staff. Some people have just canceled performance evaluations with everything going on. Instead, we're encouraging folks to think about doing kind of performance evaluations or performance conversations, but with a good deal of grace, right? A good deal of understanding the context of everything going on, the fact that everyone has new goals, right? Whatever goals we had for staff pre-COVID very likely have at least shifted, if not completely different, right? Expectations for work life, expectations for when work gets done, how work gets done, all different than it was before. So instead of, I think we've seen a little bit some nonprofits be frustrated with maybe the productivity of the staff, also be worried about staff burnout and engagement, and therefore make these accountability conversations tough. We've just been encouraging folks to have kind of resetting conversations. So less about, we need you to do this or this differently, and more about, look, we're doing work remotely for longer than we ever thought we would. Here's a couple of things we need to start seeing, right? Or here's what I expect. Let me know like why that is or isn't a reality for you. This is going to be really important too in understanding the different contexts our staff have, especially going into the fall if schools don't reopen. Some of our staff, right, are going to be full-time child care providers, teachers, in addition to full-time nonprofit professionals. And some of our staff aren't going to have to worry about that and aren't going to have that at the time to deal with. So thinking about how we kind of maintain fairness, but also a pretty flexible approach to engagement and how we're kind of tracking work getting done and what we need from our team. The next high-level thing we're going to talk about, and once again, feel free to ask any questions about staff engagement or some of these other areas we're going to touch on here in a moment, is fundraising, right? So we talked about this a lot during the summit, so I won't belabor it too much, but some really specific tips kind of moving forward, some kind of next steps to do kind of in the coming week. Finding ways to engage donors in those small groups and one-on-one. So making sure probably at this point that at least kind of once or twice a week, we're talking to some donor one-on-one, right, to make sure we're kind of still making progress down that list that we want to be talking to. And that we're doing some type of probably monthly or every other month small group donor session. Often what we see work well there is those donor briefings that we've mentioned. Doing some type of, because you've been a supporter, we appreciate it so much. We know you're kind of an avid advocate for our work. We'd really love you to kind of come and hear about what we're doing and give us your opinions and advice on it. People are going to feel kind of honored by that, excited by that, and engaged by that, and it's a great way to kind of keep them in the fold. For foundations, we need to be asking now, if we haven't already, what shifts through their funding cycle this year are going to happen. Most foundations, not all, but most foundations have a pretty good picture of what that's going to look like, even though they don't have details yet. It can at least tell you our priorities are shifting, they're not. We're delaying our funding cycle, it's going to be normal. It's going to be the same, it's going to be more, it's going to be less. And that's the information we need as we're making our projections, especially on the foundation side, because it's going to be different for kind of everyone in every region. And then finally, we really need to be working right now, as I mentioned on kind of the first slide of this session, to capture impact, right? To capture the work we're doing right now, to take the time to capture some of these stories, because everything's happening so fast and kind of a blur. There's going to be a lot more uncertainty and change over the coming months. That if we wait until kind of late November and December to try to write the story of what we've done during COVID, we're going to forget a lot, and we're going to miss some really important details and some really important impacts. So starting to evaluate those virtual efforts, starting to capture some of those anecdotes and stories from staff and clients, and starting to build that kind of picture of our work and our impact, so we have it going into end of year. And my goal would be that we have a really nicely packaged picture of that impact going into October 1st. So we have it as we start transitioning to our end of year campaign. We can always add to it with new things that happen in October and November. More recent stories are always more engaging, but folks are going to be engaged with any content about kind of our COVID work. And that's really what's going to drive some of that urgency and help specify the impact of our end of year campaign. Something we're not going to double down too much on, probably for most of us at least, is acquisition. So once again, kind of favoring retention over acquisition. Every year it's a balance of time, right? How much time do I spend trying to get new people in the door versus keeping the people I have? This year especially, it's really important that we focus most of our time on retention because we're going to have more success there. We definitely should be open to acquisition, open to any opportunities, kind of get the name out there of the organization, peer-to-peer campaign. Giving Tuesday this year, I think will be another good opportunity to kind of get some new small donors to the organization, especially through some peer-to-peer efforts, but also through social media. You know, we saw Giving Tuesday Now back in May be wildly successful and a lot more successful than we expected. So I think there's definitely some opportunity there, but overall, the vast majority of our time and effort is going to be on donor retention for the rest of 2020. And then finally, you know, we have this on the communication slide as well. We can't stay silent right now. It's easy to do in kind of a crisis, kind of pause our fundraising, but it's really important to make sure we're still asking and still engaging so we can ask in the future. Someone's asking when kind of calling donors to schedule some of those thank yous or do those one-on-ones, should we schedule them ahead of time or is it okay to cold call them? Definitely depends on the donor. Some donors, you know, don't care. Some have a strong preference one way or another. If you want to kind of set up a meeting, a lot of times we'll email to kind of schedule a meeting. But if you just want to call to kind of leave a quick voicemail that says thank you, most of the time people don't pick up a number they don't know, right? So a lot of times you'll be able to get a voicemail and leave a quick voicemail thank you. We actually find that donors really appreciate those when leaving kind of a voicemail kind of thank you. But if trying to schedule an actual meeting, often kind of sending an email instead will be a helpful kind of first step. The next step around communication. next thing to kind of take action on in the coming days and weeks. We really want to have a plan. So we want to have a plan for at least the next month. Once again, things are going to change because things are changing so fast, but a pretty good sense of the content we want to share over the next 4 weeks, especially because we want to have a visual component to it. And we have to think a little bit more critically about what that visual is right now because of not having in-person programming in most cases. So planning ahead of time is going to allow us to do that a little bit better. We also want to have a broader plan for the rest of the year. So not like a post by post, day by day, but a sense that, August and September we're going to use for engagement. October we're going to use to kind of start telling the story of what we've done during COVID. And November and December we're going to make an urgent case for support, right? Whatever that looks like for us. We want to start thinking about those like high level trends. So we can start thinking about the content we need to do today to build for that next phase. We want to make sure our content has some type of active component, right? Everyone's getting so much information. If we're only also giving information, people are just going to gloss over it, right? So we need to make sure the information we're giving is active and has something for people to do. It could be that we want them to learn something. So the action could simply be click this link and read about, poverty in the city, read about the history of homelessness, read about the disparities that this pandemic is highlighting, right? Whatever it is, it could be learning something themselves. Could be sharing something that we're asking them to kind of spread awareness of something. Could be taking an advocacy step on the local or kind of bigger level. Could be asking them to take a at-home action, right? Environmental organizations says a home recycling program or go pick up trash in the park, right? But asking them to do something, even if people don't do what we're asking, simply by asking makes them feel more involved. The communication feels more important, right? If I just tell you stuff, it feels like you gloss it over. If you know that there's an ask in there for you to do something, to get engaged, right, and an opportunity to get engaged, it feels like the communication matters more, even if I don't do the thing. And then finally, as we've kind of said time and time again, we want it to be authentic, right? We want to make sure that it's not coming from a person, that it's coming from a person, not an organization. So any of our kind of appeals, our communications, our emails should be from our executive director or board chair, founder, senior staff person, program person, whoever it is, it should be coming from someone, not from our nonprofit, because we want that kind of personal connection in our communication right now. We want to give really specific and personal examples of our impact. So especially any examples we can give during our virtual work during COVID. A lot of people are skeptical about the idea of kind of virtual impact, right? Virtual work, like, are we really making a difference right now? So any examples you have of that, of what that means to your clients, that you're still finding new ways to show up, are really important to share, to just give that context and that insight for donors to understand what's actually happening on the ground. And then finally, we want to talk about kind of three things, authentically. We want to talk about our impact we're having, those personal stories from staff and clients. We want to talk about the need that's out there, really helping kind of pull back the curtain a bit on what's happening in the community and our clients, and kind of what new issues are arising, and what old issues are worsened and kind of more urgent because of COVID. And then we don't want to talk about the organization. As we mentioned earlier, we don't want to talk too much about organizational challenges, because people aren't giving because we have challenges, they're giving because we're making impact. But we do want to put it in context and make it clear kind of the work we're doing to make this transition. Someone was asking how we get a group of donors to come to a town hall if they don't seem interested or come to a virtual meeting. A couple things. One, just being asked actually changes the donor's engagement. So even if they don't come, being asked to come already is more engaging than not being asked in the first place. No one's going to be less likely to give because they're invited to an exclusive donor briefing or exclusive town hall. So that's already a benefit, just asking. And the nice thing about doing it virtually is even if only 3 people come, those 3 people are going to be a lot more engaged. And you avoid the kind of awkwardness that if we did that in person, only 3 people came, it'd be kind of weird, right? We have like 2 or 3 staff, 2 or 3 donors there, and like now we have to figure out like what we're going to do in person. Virtually kind of takes us off the hook a little bit for that. We also see the longer we do this, the more people we have, the more we're then posting on social media about like, great town hall today, so excited to have our donors out for that and be able to talk to them, about X, Y, or Z. The more like people are going to come to future ones. So doing this consistently a bit, even if the attendance is a little low originally, making the recording available sometimes to people, maybe emailing folks who weren't able to come to the recording afterwards. All those are good steps to kind of start driving a little bit more traction we've seen a lot of organizations be surprised at how many people wouldn't come to in-person stuff like this, but would come to virtual donor stewardship events so far during COVID. The final kind of big area we want to talk about, and then we'll talk about resources, take any other questions you all have, is finances and kind of financial planning. Doing that kind of cash flow analysis for the rest of 2020 is really important. As we mentioned in the financial planning breakout, this is going to be one year that's important for our development plans and our fundraising strategy. We're thinking about it on a month-to-month basis, not just an annual basis. So it's not just have we raised enough at the end of the year, but have we raised enough by November in some cases, right, to make sure we're ahead of our costs. We want to make sure we have a couple different giving scenarios, because we don't know exactly what fundraising is going to look like, especially kind of during the second half of a 12-month year, kind of past 2020. So thinking about, what if something looks a little different, and building out a couple different models there. And then finally, taking some time to kind of really categorize those costs. Once again, as we talked about during an earlier breakout, making sure you know exactly that number, right, for kind of salary, benefits, debt service, rent, utilities. That number I know I have to pay every month. And then I can also know a little bit more about some of those one-on-one or one-time program expenses or other costs. But definitely knowing those recurring costs is going to be important. Some resources that are available to you all coming out of this. First of all, we do have actually an online learning portal. This is typically only for our nonprofit partners or for a fee. We actually, with everything going on, have made this available for free to any nonprofit anywhere for the rest of 2020. So you all have access to that. You can register at the link there, which is super hard to see on the screen. It's a hyperlink, but you'll be able to click on that in the PDF of the slides afterwards. We'll also send out this link as part of the summit follow-up. But you can register for that. It has over 120 resources on there, ranging from kind of short learning videos about different topics to tools and templates for everyday things you need in the fundraising, communication, board engagement space. Webinars, similar to kind of the portal, all of our webinars that we teach, we're teaching at least 2 a week right now on COVID or other kind of evergreen fundraising and comms and board engagement and staff engagement topics. All of those will be free for the rest of 2020 as well. So you have access to those. That list is kind of regularly updated on our website. So if you go to our website, click on webinars or follow the link there, you'll be able to see any of our webinars we're teaching for the next month at any given time. All the slides and also recordings from these sessions will be available on the Summit website in the coming week, and we will email you to let you know when those are up. Additionally, a few supporters like Jamie during the keynote talked about putting together those 6 points on a one-pager. We talked about sharing during the racial justice panel our kind of 15 tips for anti-racism at small nonprofits and kind of tangible tips, and a few other handouts throughout the summit. So we'll be sure to share those on the Summit website as well, and you'll be able to access those there, and recordings. And then finally, if you want to stay in touch with the catalog, kind of know what we're up to, what's coming up ahead, feel free to sign up for our newsletter, and the link is there as well, and will also be shared out in the Summit follow-up. So we'll be sending an email next week with both the evaluation and also when you can expect these resources to be live on the website, and also links to these other resources that you can use in the future. Any final questions before we wrap up the summit today? Great. Well, thank you all for joining so much. Thank you for joining throughout the summit. We really appreciate it and had a great time working with you, hearing some of the examples of work that y'all are doing, and let us know how we can help. Thanks and have a good weekend.